In an exquisite bar, a singer is performing. A bar bouncer, Tony, is welcoming guests and giving them seats. As he is working, he sees a couple entering after the man gives his hat to a woman with a warning to protect it with her life. But Tony pays her and takes the hat from her.
I know, I heard. Get with me, all right?
Shortly after, a fight breaks out between guests and Tony kicks one of them. Amidst this, the man with the hat starts asking for the hat, which is nowhere to be found. He yells at everyone, asking for his hat.
You tell that fat you bastard, I don't get my hat, I'll burn the company down.
After the incident, the bar closed for some time. Following this, Tony gives the hat back and the man gives him money as appreciation. By morning, Tony goes back home. He drinks milk before getting ready for bed. He checks up on his kids and goes to his own bed to sleep next to his wife.
Morning.
The next day, Tony wakes up to find his relatives in the living room, watching football and yelling. He then goes to the kitchen to see what his wife, Dolores, cooked. He then puts glasses he saw black workers drinking from in the trash can. Then they all sit for a meal. As they are eating, Tony's wife announces that Tony is in need of a job. The bar is closing for repairs, so they need something to sustain them for a couple of months. Later that day, Tony entered a food-eating contest, hoping to win $50. His opponent easily ate 24 hot dogs. Tony barely managed half before giving up.
Yeah.
As he is talking with his wife, a friend calls and mentions a chauffeur job at a wealthy pianist's estate. Tony goes to the given address, but he finds himself in a theater. He assumes he got the wrong address at first, but he is told the pianist lives upstairs. He goes upstairs and waits for his turn. Finally, he enters the house for the interview. Finally, Dr. Donald Shirley arrives. They greet, and Donald sits in front of Tony. Tony asks about the jewelry that Donald is wearing, and he explains.
Are them horns real?
Elephant tusks, yes.
Then the interview starts. Tony is asked about his previous experience, and he explains. Donald then tells him that he is not a medical doctor and is a musician. Donald explained his plan, an 8-week concert tour through the American South. He then asks if working for a black man would be a problem. Tony acts as if he doesn't mind and lies about having colored people at their house the other day.
For drinks.
I see, you're married.
Donald then explains that he needs more than just a driver. He needs someone to manage his schedule, handle his clothes, and make sure everything runs smoothly. The pay, $100 a week. Tony didn't like the idea. The job felt too close to servitude, especially serving a black man. He decides to leave.
Good luck, Doc.
Donald calls from behind. He tells him a lot of people recommended him, and he thinks he can rely on him. Tony then tells him that he would only work as a driver. He also raises the money from $100 per week to $125. At this, Donald disagrees and bids Tony farewell.
Thank you for stopping by.
After that, Tony walks alone. Sad, another job opportunity is lost. He heads into the bar and orders a drink. While serving his drink, the bartender tells him Augie is looking for him. Tony goes to talk to Augie. Augie asks what happened at the bar he used to work at. He wants to know about the fight. The guy he hit is Mikey Cerrone, and he is part of a group called Charlie the Hands. Hand asked Augie to look through it, but he is going to cover it for him. Augie then offers him a job, but Tony refuses, telling him he would rather spend time with his family.
What a pretty little wife of yours.
Nah, I'm good.
After that, Tony goes to a pawn shop and gives his phone as collateral to get $50. He then goes home, and Dolores asks about the interview. Tony tells her that the doctor is not a real doctor, and he is a musician. He also explains what the house looks like.
You should have seen this place, D. It was filled with statues and all kinds of fancy crap.
When Dolores realizes that the doctor is black, she tells Tony he wouldn't have lasted a week with him anyway.
But you wouldn't last a week with him.
For the right money, I would.
The next morning, Donald calls Tony and asks to talk to Dolores. Once she is on the phone, he asks if it would be okay to take Tony away from his family for 2 months. Dolores, despite not wanting Tony to be away, agrees. After the call ends, Tony tries to comfort her, telling her it is good money.
26 hot dogs every day.
On the day of departure, Donald's team hands Tony a set of car keys and a small booklet called the Green Book. It lists restaurants, motels, and service stops where black travelers are welcome. Tony then says his goodbyes to his relatives and his sons. After that, Dolores approaches to say goodbye to her husband. She warns him to take care of himself and gives him the sandwich she packed for him and Donald. She then kisses him goodbye and warns that he better come for Christmas.
You better be home for Christmas, or don't come home at all.
Finally, Donald arrives. Tony is expected to put the suitcases in the car, but Tony refuses to. The housekeeper, glancing at him, puts them in. The road trip begins awkwardly. Donald sets strict rules. As they are driving, a car that is taking the other musicians approaches. Donald opens the window and talks to the other man in Russian. They agree to meet in Pittsburgh, and the car drives away. After that, Tony keeps talking, and Donald tells him he wants a moment of silence. But Tony keeps talking. Shortly after, they stop to have a meal. Tony eats with enthusiasm. Donald asks how the food is. Tony simply replies, saying it is salty. Tony then brings up Donald's album that has orphans on the cover, but Donald tells him that the kids on the cover are not actual children. They are meant to represent demons in the bowels of hell. They continued their journey, and suddenly Tony decided to stop. When asked why he was stopping, he excused himself, saying he needed to urinate. Later that night, they reached their destination. Their first stop was Pittsburgh. They got into their hotel. Tony only saw from his window as Donald sat on his balcony, simply enjoying the night. Later, Donald approached Tony, who was waiting for him in the lobby. He gave him money, telling him he didn't need to ask if he needed to buy something, but to keep the receipts. He then led him to the room where he was going to be performing, but warned Tony that he needed to mind the way he talked.
Yeah, I got my own problems. Now I gotta worry about what people think about the way I talk?
He also told him that when he was introduced, Tony would be introduced too, but Tony's surname Vallelonga was a bit hard to pronounce. Donald proposed that he be called Tony Valle, but Tony refused to allow this and insisted he was going to be called Tony Vallelonga. He also gave the option of Tony Lip, but Donald didn't agree with this either. He told Tony that the people were genteel, and Tony the Lip was too worldly for them.
All these high-class people, so much smarter than me.
This made Tony angry. He told Donald that if the people couldn't pronounce his name, he would just wait outside and Donald could go in alone. Donald agreed and went in without him. Tony went outside and smoked alone, but he changed his mind and went inside.
Please welcome the Don Shirley Trio.
Donald played to a white audience, accompanied by two other musicians. Tony stood off stage, dumbfounded by what he saw. Donald's playing was amazing. The audience was equally enjoying the performance. Later, Tony gambled. When he came to the car, he found Donald waiting for him. He told him if he wanted extra money, he could just give it to him. But Tony thought it was better to win it. Then they continued their journey. The next day, Dolores received a letter from Tony. In the letter, Tony reassured his wife that he was fine and eating well. He also wrote about Donald's performance, telling her that it was not what he expected and was actually good. He also thought Donald was smart, and whenever he looked at him through the rearview mirror, he was always thinking.
But it don't look fun to be that smart. I miss you.
Meanwhile, Donald and Tony were on the road. Donald asked about the song Tony was playing. Tony asked if Donald could play it, but Donald thought it was complicated. He then asked Tony what his nickname, Tony Lip, meant. Tony explained that he could manipulate others into doing what he wanted them to do.
Why are you smiling?
What do you mean?
Shortly after, they stopped at a store. Tony went inside to buy cigarettes. By the door, there was a display of rocks for sale. One stone was on the ground, and Tony picked it up and pocketed it. As he did this, the driver of the other musician, Oleg, saw him. When Tony came back, Donald told him he couldn't steal the stone. Tony argued, saying he didn't steal it and had just picked it up from the ground. Donald insisted that he pay for the stone or return it. Reluctantly, Tony returned the stone. Donald offered to buy him the stone, but Tony refused.
You took all the fun out of it.
On the next stop, Hanover, Indiana, Tony inspected the venue ahead of time and found the piano in terrible shape, dusty and full of trash. It was also not the kind of piano that Donald played on. He asked the staff about it. He told them the piano was not a Steinway, but Donald only played on a grand Steinway piano, and it was in his contract.
Dr. Shirley. The Don Shirley Trio. They're playing tonight.
The man brushed it off, saying that it didn't matter. Tony also mentioned that it was dirty, but when the man ignored the request, Tony, enraged, punched him on the spot. This made the man change his attitude. Later that night, Donald performed on a Steinway. After that, they drove to the next town. During the drive, Tony asked about Donald's family. Reluctantly, Donald told him that he had a brother. He also was married but couldn't keep the marriage because it was hard for him to manage it along with his music.
Couldn't seem to manage both worlds.
Tony then stopped to grab some fried chicken. Back in the car, Tony offered Donald chicken, but Donald didn't want to eat. Tony insisted, telling him that black people eat chicken. Donald, offended, told him that just because he was black didn't mean he enjoyed the same food and music as other black people.
I'm not gonna get assaulted.
You're missing the point. For you to make the assumption
Tony
that...
kept insisting he try it, and finally Donald relented. He accepted one and started eating. When he asked what to do with the bones, Tony told him to throw them out the window, and Donald did as he was told.
There you go.
Later that night, they stopped at a motel. They got into their own rooms to rest, but Donald went to a bar. Tony got called to the bar because Donald was in trouble. 3 men were harassing him. Tony arrived and threatened to shoot them. Finally, they let go of Donald and Tony took him away.
Go on.
The following day, Donald performed with the others, and as always, it was good. The next day, they continued their journey, but suddenly the car broke down. They got off and Tony fixed the car. As he was doing so, Donald noticed a family of black people farming. They looked at him, amazed by the fact that a white man was working for him. The following day, they made another stop in Raleigh, North Carolina. The crowd was surprisingly warm, more welcoming than before, but the hospitality didn't last. When they sat for a meal, they revealed a special food made for Donald, and it happened to be fried chicken, following the common stereotype about black people. After his first number, Donald stepped backstage for a break and asked to use the restroom. The event staff refused. They pointed him toward a rundown outhouse designated for black people. It was degrading. Rather than argue, Donald asked Tony to take him back to the hotel to use the bathroom there.
I don't make the rules down here.
No? Then who does?
When they returned for the rest of the show, Tony was baffled. Donald walked on stage with a polite smile, greeting the audience as if nothing had happened. Later, one of the musicians explained, Donald had faced this kind of treatment countless times. He had been conditioned to endure it, to perform with dignity while being humiliated behind the curtain. The next morning, Tony sat down to write a letter to his wife. When Donald read it, he didn't hold back. Tony's grammar and phrasing were clumsy at best, so Donald helped him refine it, crafting a heartfelt, poetic version from Tony's rough draft. When Dolores read the letter days later, she was deeply moved.
And I will love you the rest of my life.
Later, they stopped in Macon, Georgia. As they walked, Donald stopped to look at a suit. Donald encouraged him to try it, and they went in. Tony picked up a suit, and the seller, assuming it was for him, pointed him to the changing room. Then Tony handed the suit to Donald so he could try it on, but the seller followed him and took the suit from his hands. He told Donald that he couldn't try it on, but if he decided to buy it, they could tailor it to his size. Hearing this, Donald quietly walked out of the store. Later that night, Donald performed. After the performance, they got into their hotel. In his room, Tony received a call and was called to a hotel. It was the police who called him, and it was about Donald. Donald had been arrested in the swimming pool because he was found with a guy.
Let him put his pants on. We talk about this?
Sure, we could.
Tony bribed the officers to let them go. He offered to buy them suits and gave them money. Finally, they let him go. When they got out, Donald was angry that Tony paid them off. The way they treated him was not right. Tony explained that if what happened got out, it would ruin his career. They argued and finally got in the car and drove away. Later, they checked into a hotel in Memphis. As they entered, Tony ran into a couple of old friends. They were surprised to see Tony working for a black man. One even assumed Tony must be desperate for cash and offered him a better job on the spot. Tony declined, firm but respectful. One of them asked him to meet at a local bar.
Sorry, Doc. There's some friends from New York. Hey.
That evening, as Tony stepped out, he found Donald waiting near the hallway. Donald assumed Tony was chasing a better offer, and in a moment of quiet insecurity, offered to double Tony's pay if he stayed.
That also means a raise in pay.
No.
Tony quickly refused the raise because they had already agreed on $125 a week. He then reassured him he wasn't leaving. He'd stick with Donald until the tour wrapped up, no matter the money. Relieved, Donald relaxed. As he went down, Donald called from behind and apologized for the previous night, but Tony told him he could understand.
I know it's complicated world.
After the bar, Tony invited Donald to sit in the hotel lobby. There, over soft lighting and quiet chatter, Donald opened up. He shared the story of how he became a concert pianist. Donald's journey to becoming a concert pianist hadn't been typical. Years ago, while playing in a bar, a white pianist happened to hear him perform. Impressed by his skill, the man helped Donald land a job at a record label, playing classical music, a genre traditionally dominated by white musicians. That moment set the path Donald would follow for years.
But I was persuaded by my record company to pursue a career in popular music.
Since then, he has built his career on classical compositions. But Tony, watching how audiences reacted during each show, had a different take. He told Donald that people weren't just coming for Bach or Beethoven. They came to watch him play. He suggested Donald explore jazz, the kind of music that felt more alive, more personal. Tony believed that was where Donald's brilliance truly shone. Donald appreciated the encouragement.
Not like I can.
After their show in Memphis, the two hit the road again. Donald kept helping Tony write letters. Dolores and her family were touched by them. The words were beautiful.
They say our great-great-great-grandfather helped Da Vinci with the Sistine Chapel.
During a drive one day, they stopped for traffic lights, and Tony noticed a white couple staring at him. Without glancing, Tony gave them the finger and drove away. Meanwhile, Christmas was approaching, and Tony's family was getting prepared. Donald kept performing, amazing his audience with his talent. One night after a performance, Tony kept driving, but the trip was interrupted when they were pulled over by local police. The officers asked Tony to step out. What started as routine quickly turned ugly. One cop accused Donald of being a runaway and Tony of aiding him. Tony lost his temper and struck the officer. They were both thrown in jail.
Excuse me, sirs. Perhaps you could let me out so that we could discuss the situation further.
Inside the station, Donald calmly demanded an explanation. Why was he arrested when he had done nothing? The officers ignored him. They even made racial statements. Growing frustrated, he threatened to call his lawyer. They finally gave him a phone, thinking he didn't have a lawyer to call. In the cell, Donald yelled at Tony for losing his temper. He was going to miss his show, and it was all his fault. He tried to tell him that he could not use violence as an answer every time.
Oh, and he called you.
Moments later, the police chief answered a call. His tone changed immediately. Apologies poured out of him as he scrambled to release the two men. The officer who got hit refused at first, but the chief told him he better do it if he wanted to keep his job.
And I'm telling you to get him the goddamn out!
Who the hell did you call?
Once back on the road, Tony asked who Donald had called. It turned out Donald had reached out to none other than the U.S. Attorney General's office, specifically the president's brother, Bobby Kennedy. That was who got them out.
So what? That's what the guy gets paid for. What else he got to do?
Tony laughed, stunned by the revelation, but the conversation soured when Tony, half joking, implied that he was blacker than Donald. Donald argued that just because Tony knew black culture didn't mean he was black. But Tony pushed back. He told him he had lived in a black neighborhood all his life and was still living there with his wife. But Donald had it easy. A big house, money, fame, the whole package. Donald went quiet, then asked Tony to pull over.
What? What are you doing?
Stepping out of the car, Donald confronted him. With emotion in his voice, he said Tony didn't understand. Yes, he had wealth, but behind the expensive clothes and the elegant home, he lived alone, isolated, caught between two worlds that didn't fully accept him. Despite his prestige, Donald lived in isolation. White society wouldn't befriend him, and many in the black community kept their distance, seeing his polished manner and formal speech as signs he had abandoned his roots. In truth, he belonged nowhere.
And if I'm not man enough, then tell me, Tony, what am I?
Tony stood there quiet now, seeing for the first time that Donald's life wasn't one of privilege. It was a sad one. After the conversation, they got back on the road, heading to their final stop. Donald told Tony he needed to sleep. Tony said they could stop at the next hotel and he could sneak him into his room, but Donald refused to stay in an establishment that didn't welcome him. So they finally stopped at a hotel that also accepted black people. They got a double bed and stayed in the same room. Tony wrote a letter to Dolores. Donald offered to help, but the letter was already good.
Thanks.
As Donald prepared to sleep, Tony mentioned he should reconnect with his brother. Donald brushed it off, saying his brother knew where he was and would reconnect if he wanted to. Later that night, they stopped at an upscale restaurant in Birmingham. There, the pattern repeated. Donald was shown to a cramped waiting room near the kitchen. While dining inside, Tony was joined by the other two musicians. One of them started telling him about an incident that happened before. Donald had performed in the same restaurant and was beaten by white people for playing their music. Now all Donald wanted was change. His goal was to challenge how people saw Black Americans, to force them to see a man where they had only seen color. Soon after, Donald entered the restaurant. When he tried to sit with them, the staff stepped in and turned him away. No Black guests allowed.
This guy's saying Dr. Shirley can't eat here.
Oh, well, I apologize.
Tony, furious, approached the manager and pleaded for an exception. Donald was the star of the show. The other musicians were allowed to have a meal, and even those who came to watch were allowed, but the main star was not. The manager refused, offering instead a compromise. Donald could eat out in his dressing room or in another restaurant down the street.
Doc, just 1 second.
Donald stood his ground and refused the offer to eat outside in the garden. Calm and composed, he made it clear that if he was not allowed to have dinner in the main hall with the other guests, then he would cancel the performance. The manager, clearly unsettled by the threat, pulled Tony aside and asked for a private conversation. Once they were alone, he tried to convince him.
You're the Boston Celtics basketball club?
Yeah.
He told him that a couple of months ago, the basketball team Boston Celtics came there, but they were not allowed to eat in the restaurant. So now they were not changing the rules for this either. The manager offered Tony a bribe, hoping he could persuade Donald to accept the arrangement quietly. When Tony refused the bribe, the manager mentioned that he wouldn't be in a job like this if he wasn't desperate for money. That did it for Tony's temper. He clenched his fists and was ready to strike the man, but Donald arrived just in time and told him to stand down. Looking Tony in the eye, Donald said he would take his advice this time. If Tony believed he should go ahead and perform, Donald would do it. With quiet resolve, Tony told Donald they were leaving. The show was not worth the cost of his dignity.
Where the hell do you think you're going? Don, don't do this. Now, you signed a contract. Now.
As they walked out, the manager followed, begging Donald to stay. He reminded him of his contract and said he should honor it, but the two walked out.
This is why you people don't work down here, because you're unreliable, you hear me?
They got back in the car and drove away. Later that night, Donald suggested they stop for dinner at a small bar in a Black neighborhood. The place was simple and full of life. They took a seat and started eating. Inside, they stood out in their formal suits, and a waiter noticed. He asked why two men dressed like that had come to eat there. Tony answered without hesitation. He told the waiter that Donald was a famous pianist.
That right? You good?
The waiter asked if Donald was good. When he stayed silent, she asked him to play, pointing at the piano in the room. Tony encouraged him to play. Donald agreed and sat down at the piano. As he played, the mood in the bar lifted. The crowd cheered, danced, and sang along. A few musicians joined him, turning it into an impromptu jam session. For the first time, Donald looked relaxed. He smiled because he was genuinely enjoying himself. After the music and laughter faded, they went out to their car. Tony noticed two men hiding behind the car and fired a gun into the sky. The two men ran away. Then they returned to the road. It was Christmas Eve and a snowstorm had started. As they drove at night, they were stopped by a police officer. The back tire was flat. Tony got out to change it with the help of the officer. When they were done, the officer wished him a Merry Christmas, and they continued on the road. But Tony realized he could not drive anymore. He suggested finding a nearby place to stay for the night, but Donald insisted that they press on. Tony couldn't even keep his eyes open. He was tired, so Donald took the wheel and drove the final stretch himself. They eventually arrived at Tony's home. As they pulled up, Donald woke Tony, who was sleeping in the back seat, and told him he was home. Tony invited Donald to come inside and meet his family, but Donald refused. He wished Tony a Merry Christmas and left.
Merry Christmas.
When Tony entered his house, his family welcomed him warmly. His sons ran to hug him, and Dolores kissed him. Then they all sat around the table to eat. Back in his own home, Donald told his housekeeper to go to her family for the holiday. After she left, Donald sat alone. He took out the stone he had taken from Tony and placed it on the table. Meanwhile, Tony's house was filled with warmth. They asked about the trip, but when they called Donald names, Tony told them not to call him that. Amidst the conversation, there was a knock at the door. One of Tony's friends had stopped by for a holiday visit. As Tony turned to close the door, he noticed someone else outside. It was Donald, standing there quietly.
Oh, welcome.
Tony lit up with joy and hugged him before welcoming him in. He introduced Donald to his family, who received him with unexpected warmth and kindness. He thanked Dolores for letting him borrow her husband, and Dolores even hugged him and thanked him for helping Tony write those heartfelt letters.
Thank you for helping him with the letters.